The European Union has agreed sweeping reforms to the bloc's asylum system. After nearly 10 years of wrangling, member states have now reached consensus on new rules to curb irregular migration. Governments and officials say the changes will cut the growing numbers of arrivals while respecting human rights. But charities and aid agencies that help migrants have condemned the changes as restrictive and dangerous.
After almost a decade of debate and division, the European Union has reached a deal to reform its migration rules.
I know exactly what it means when we say that we have finally delivered on the Migration and Asylum Pact, probably the most important legislative deal of this mandate.
The planned reform includes speedier vetting of irregular arrivals, new border detention centres for migrants less likely to be granted asylum, and swifter deportation for people whose claims are rejected. The bloc also plans a more even distribution of asylum seekers among member states. Countries refusing to take people in will have to make a financial contribution instead. Catherine Woolard, expert in migration policy, calls this a dark day for Europe.
The people seeking protection in Europe will face a much harsher and restrictive regime. Many of them will be in situations that are similar to what we see now on the Greek islands, with people in detention or de facto detention and subject to very poor asylum procedures, or maybe with no access to asylum procedures at all.
She thinks the pact significantly undermines the right to asylum, but Brussels insists this is a breakthrough.
This is a very important answer to the EU citizens that have been waiting for this answer. We need to manage migration orderly, and we need to be able to do that. We have to do it together. No member states can do it alone.
EU member states and Parliament will still have to formally ratify the reforms, and they're not going to take effect immediately.
Well, Dr. Meike Riebau is a migration expert and Director of Advocacy and Policy at Save the Children Germany. Welcome to DW. I was looking at the Save the Children website today, and I saw that it condemned these proposals, saying that they will, I'm quoting here, they will lead to blatant violations of children's rights, endanger children on the move, and lead to further separation of migrant families. So let's pick through a couple of those. How will they lead to the blatant violation of children's rights?
Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to discuss these reforms today. Yes, we are actually, while we have seen this coming for a long time, we are very concerned about what has been decided today in Brussels. What we are mostly concerned about in this vast mass of new regulations that has been decided today is the fact that now all children, no matter their age, will be part of these so-called border procedures, which means that they will be part of detention-like conditions. And this was something that we were trying to avoid until the last minute. And it was actually hugely debated, but in the end, unfortunately, it could not be prevented. And we, as Save the Children, we work both on the Canary Islands, but also in the Balkans and in other regions, as in the Greek islands. And what we are seeing there, when children are subjected to these detention-like conditions, is that these are very harmful for these children. They have long-lasting effects, even if these conditions will only last for a couple of weeks. But what we also fear is, while the European Union speaks of 12 weeks of border procedures at most, we feel this is actually, in reality, something that they cannot uphold. And
right. OK, let me just jump in there, just because I did ask you specifically about the claims made on your website, and I haven't heard you yet say how or where these proposals will lead to the blatant violation of children's rights. So let's hear that.
So in the UNCRC, the UN Child Rights Convention, it says that detention is never in the best interest of a child. And of course, when we talk about refugees and migrants, these children obviously also enjoy the same rights as do all other children.
Okay, so not in the best interests of the child, but not a blatant violation of children's rights. You also mentioned there that the 12 weeks, the hoped for maximum 12 weeks that children might be kept under these conditions. Would that be better, that 12 weeks, if they achieved it, would that be better or worse than the conditions that are often found in these detention camps in Greece and Italy?
If what the European Union is envisioning right now were in any way practicable, it would still not be better.
We'll come to that. But so 12 weeks, if they could achieve that, would that be better or worse than what's there now?
It would be worse by far because even now...
Forgive me, right, so just because it's important to just follow your logic through, you're saying that at the moment, when children come here through illegal or irregular routes, they are processed within 12 weeks. And so putting a 12-week ceiling on it would make this worse. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what we're saying. So basically, these 12 weeks are a fiction. And these are that doesn't exist.
We presume
moment,
it's a fiction, right?
In the future either.
Exactly. So this is my point, really. You say that you've talked about it being a blatant violation of children's rights. I haven't heard that yet. You've said that everything will be worse. It hasn't happened yet, but whatever is proposed, if it happens, you will agree that if it happened, and I take it what you said about calling it a fiction, but if it happened, it would be better than what's there now. Amongst the changes that has been proposed today, free legal advice to people undergoing the system. Do you have a problem with that?
No, the free legal advice is actually one of the very few wins that is in there. However, we are very concerned that this is also that is not very feasible in practice, because what we are about to see is that these children will be in facilities that will basically consist as a legal void. And right now, if we look at the Greek islands or also the Canary Islands, legal counseling and the access to lawyers and to advisory groups is very hard to obtain for capacity reasons, but also because these facilities are so sealed off that the access is really hard to obtain for the groups of now. And this is a systematic problem that will consistently be there and also be an increasing problem when everyone is part of these procedures.
Okay. What would have been top of your list of asks for what you would regard as a fair and just system? One thing, what would have been top of the list?
So I will say three things. One, we wanted the exclusion of all children of these border procedures. Two, we were also very much hoping for a fair distribution system within the European Union that would allow for the states like Italy and Greece to not be the ones that are burdened with the majority of all the asylum cases as they are now, because we also know and have been seeing that this is a major burden for these states, and this needs to change. We need a fair distribution within the European Union.
Okay, and that's being proposed. We'll leave it there, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Meike Riebau from Save the Children Germany. You're watching DW News live from Berlin. Our correspondent in Brussels, Rosie Birchard, gave us this assessment of those reforms.
Brussels is hailing this as a breakthrough. The European Union has finally agreed to overhaul its asylum policy after almost a decade of debate and division, and certainly for as long as I've been covering this, migration and asylum policy has been a huge source of toxicity between EU member states. That's why the EU says this is a historic day, and EU officials are claiming it's not only a good deal for the EU but also for migrants, although that's something which refugee rights campaigners are refuting. Under the reforms, some migrants and asylum seekers would be more evenly distributed across the bloc. That's something which member states in the south of the EU, where most migrants arrive, for example, Italy, Spain and Greece, something that they really welcome. They also welcome the fact that EU countries which refuse to take in more migrants would simply have to cough up on some cash if they don't want to take people in. Now, there is another more controversial reform as part of this plan, and under that, migrants would be divided at the border according to how likely it is that their asylum applications would be granted. That means that those from countries seen as safer would be processed more quickly in special detention centres, and refugee rights campaigners say that's essentially watering down the right to asylum, and they're especially concerned that families with children are involved in that plan. Now, overall, these reforms still need final approval from the EU legislators, and they're not likely to kick in for a couple of years, so there still may be some political roadblocks ahead.
Rosie Birchard. Now, Juan Fernando Lopez Aguilar is the chair of the European Parliament's Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. He's also a member of the Spanish Socialist Party. Welcome to DW. Is this a good deal?
Thank you for having me to begin with. And yes, I think it is the deal we could actually reach. So it's a good deal because it's better to have a deal than to have no deal at all. It's better to have an outcome after lengthy negotiations, after hard work throughout the years, 3 hard working years relentlessly, with no result. That would be a total failure. And we haven't failed. We have put in place rules. For one thing, that is a gain, because we're coming from a situation which is utterly untenable. Lack of compliance, lack of legal certainty, and of course individual member states in a sequence of action, reaction, and internal criticism, not only across the member states of the European Union. You didn't control your external border. You authorized secondary movements. That's the kind of rhetoric I hear in the Council of Ministers of Interior when I represent the European Parliament.
Here's the thing about
now we are
what you said.
Which is based on rules and regulations which are binding for the member states.
Our time is limited, and I'm intrigued by the fact that when I asked if this was a good deal, your answer was, well, this is a deal that we could get through, and this is better than nothing. What's it missing?
It was missing the solidarity, and now there will be room for solidarity for one thing. Considering that the Lisbon Treaty mandates that the whole system, asylum and migration, must be based on the principle of shared responsibility and binding solidarity. Solidarity was the missing link, and now there is a regime for solidarity. There is a EU relocation coordinator. There are solidarity pledges offers by the member states to that member state which has an external border in a particular situation of crisis, emergency, or force majeure, so that the other member states can actually come up with a European scale of response with a backup plan, so that country is not left on its own any longer. I am a Canarian, I know what I'm talking about.
A big thing on this is solidarity. We get that. I want to put to you a criticism because this has been heavily criticised by rights groups, and Save the Children says that these changes will lead to blatant violation of children's rights. They'll endanger children on the move, and they'll lead to further separation of migrant families. What would you say in response to that?
I would tell the European citizens that the European Parliament mandate has cared about fundamental rights compliance, about particular situations of vulnerable people, minors, unaccompanied minors, and underage with families. And we have made exception in every piece of legislation. They're all intertwined. There are 5 regulations, not easy. But believe me, that was precisely the fight of the European Parliament, with much against, because believe me, we are talking to the Council, and the Council is the gathering of 27 interior ministers, which are pretty obsessed with security and very against solidarity and disregarding fundamental rights consideration when it comes to security. But we have fought for fundamental rights considerations, and we have managed to insert exemptions or particular treatment of vulnerable people so that we have a fair combination between not only fair responsibility, shared responsibility and solidarity, but also fundamental rights concerns. Believe me, that has been the highest priority for the European Parliament negotiating team.
Understood. I mean, I'm again intrigued by your answer there. You say that this was a big fight as you tried to put this deal together, and that the interior ministers, are you saying that they were against preserving the fundamental human rights of migrants as they try to access the European Union?
I'm telling you that it's not easy to combine 5 regulations all together. And the European Parliament made the right choice by embracing the package approach, because the Council otherwise would have preferred the security files, screening and Eurodac, setting aside the solidarity files, which are management of asylum and migration regulation, asylum procedures, binding rules for all of them in a regulation which is particularly binding for the member states, and the crisis regulation providing for solidarity. I'm telling you that it's only obvious that around the table of the Council of Ministers of Interior, there's an increasing number of interior ministers clearly inclined to enhance security, securitization of the external borders, armoring the external borders with a look of rejection of irregular migrants. And the European Parliament mandate has fought real hard to strike a balance between the compliance with international humanitarian law, of course, the EU standard of fundamental rights, which is the highest in the world, and of course, particularly vulnerable people, which is the case of unaccompanied minors and minors with families.
Thank you so much for joining us. Juan Fernando Lopez Aguilar, Chair of the European Parliament's Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.